Yellowstone National Park and the NPS, a history of how revelations and reforms can dictate a revolution. The Yellowstone National Park Protection Act was signed into law by President Ulysses S. Grant on March 1, 1872, setting aside the massive 3,000-acre forest as the first federally protected land ever in any country, state, or territory up to that point. The idea of setting aside chunks of land for public or private use dates back to at least the Roman Empire. But for the government to take this massive piece of land away from the people and protecting it themselves was completely novel. Upon creation, and continuing to this day, Yellowstone National Park's management and intent has been under scrutiny. The first superintendent lived thousands of miles away and received no pay. Contraband deals selling away pieces of the park, poaching, etc. ran rampant through the park. Conservation was indeed not at the heart of early Yellowstone. However, through the work of countless individuals over decades, the park has inspired generations of people and sparked the beginning of the conservationist movement across the globe. The reforms implemented on the park, specifically the creation of the National Park Service, has paved the way for over 6,500 national parks across the earth and the spark for the conservationist revolution. While Native Americans had lived in Yellowstone for at least 2,000 years, Europeans first came into contact with Yellowstone in the early 1800s. On their famous journey, Lewis and Clark are known to have passed through Yellowstone in 1805. Trappers and Oregon Trail migrants moved there seeking furs and land. They established communities around the land that would eventually become the park. In 1871, geologist Ferdinand Hayden was sent on an expedition to the area. While he was only supposed to take samples from the park, he was so moved by the park, he became determined to protect it. Fast forward to March 1872, after a year of lobbying on Capitol Hill, the Yellowstone Act was passed and Hayden's dream was achieved. But now what? The original plan to run Yellowstone was flimsy at best. The superintendents received only the money made on site, so there was hardly enough money to keep the park open, much less make improvements to it. The poachers and illegal loggers ran wild through the park with no fear of being caught because there was no one to catch them. Native American tribes like the Blackfeet and Shoshone, who had lived there for thousands of years, were forced off and made to walk thousands of miles to their new reservations. Huge chunks of the park were being simply sold away to the highest bidder. Eventually, the situation became dire enough that in 1886, the U.S. Army was put in charge of protecting and enforcing laws within Yellowstone. The commanding general at the time, Philip Sheridan, had been pushing for military intervention for years. The Army implemented some enforcement against illegal hunting and clear hunting, but their ultimate rule was unorganized. An article from June 1803 issue of the Wyoming Tribune summed it up best. I desire to preface what may follow by the statement that I have yet to meet the first man who does not favor forest reserves. It is their improper creation and mismanagement that has caused all the trouble. Conservation was not the main goal of the park at the time. There were no reports on animal populations in the park. Soldiers hand-fed elk and bison and put out natural fires, altering the wild landscape. Another famous example was the shooting of the wolves within the park. Wolves, especially out west, were hated by ranchers because of the fear they would eat their flocks. As a result, wolves received a horrible rap for the little harm they caused. Barry Lopez describes in his novel Of Wolves and Men, wolves being torn apart at the limbs by horses and being burned alive. The last wolves were murdered in the 1820s within the park. Yellowstone had fallen out of order, but this was all about to change. The landscape of Yellowstone and national parks worldwide changed forever on August 25, 1916, with the passing of the Organic Act of 1916 and the creation of the National Park Service. Put simply, the order put existing parks under the new service's control rather than the Army's, and gave them power to improve and add new parks. Under the new order, these parks would be run by the independent and unified service, and they would be protected by park rangers instead of soldiers. The ultimate goal of the NPS was to garner their focus towards increased conservation and public enjoyment within the parks. Like most things in American history, criticism faced it immediately. Many argued the Army had much success governing the park, which was true, but the Army's main goal while they were in role was to wipe out the contrabanders that had endangered the park, which by this time were largely a fear of the past. The shift in governing displayed a progressive era movement towards the conservation and studying of natural places. Progressive era presidents, particularly Theodore Roosevelt, had already shown America's shift towards reforming and creating a better society. Scientific conservation of the natural wonders was the next logical step for America. An immediate impact of the NPS was it allowed for an economic boom in areas near national parks. Many young men and women can now get jobs as park rangers. Lots of soldiers who had been in the park previously decided to stay on as rangers. Colorado A&M College became known as the Ranger Factory because so many of the students worked as seasonal rangers at Yellowstone. Another huge problem that had plagued Yellowstone for years was poor roads and trails. The June 11, 1920 Herald Advance elaborated on the problem. There is much evidence these days of an interest on the part of the public in good roads, but this interest, like a general interest of the public in many things, is so uncrystallized and scattered in its application. 90% of this money was wasted, not because anyone stole any of it, but because there was no intelligent plan for roads or trails. In 1956, the NPS launched Mission 66 to improve trails and roads, update facilities for visitors, bring effective interpretation, and protect natural resources by the year 1966. While not entirely successful right away, as a result, the scientific age of Yellowstone was ushered in. Unnatural dumps had been established across the park, and hungry bears, wolves, and other animals, with many of their other food sources depleted, feasted on the garbage. While they were forced to live too close to humans to access the dump, hundreds of bear attacks, at least, were reported when the dumps were in use. The atmosphere was not safe. In the 1990s, these dumps were closed and locked away. And then, 60 years after they were wiped out, the wolves became a heated topic once again. Starting in the 1980s, environmentalists started to push to bring the gray wolf back to Yellowstone. They cited the huge role wolves had played in the ecosystem, and the ecosystem that was now failing. The organization, Defenders of Wildlife, raised tens of thousands of dollars in support of the wolves. But the real back force came from the farmers and ranchers from the areas around Yellowstone, who still believed in the old lies about wolves. Out there, wolves were often compared to infectious diseases like smallpox, a bad thing that only spreads. To quote John Sco's 1985 Time magazine article, some of them, anti-wolfers, like to draw a line between Eastern eco-babblers who puff wolves as gallant symbols of wilderness and true Westerners who know them as cruel and cowardly and who can be relied on to shoot, shovel, and shut up, as the brag goes in the cowboy bars. But Brad Little, a stockman from Emmett, Idaho, concedes, it's not so much wolves we're afraid of, it's wolf managers. But to wolf partisans, the bedrock argument is a brooding circular truth. Without wolves, there are no wolves. Wolves were killed because of the old, outdated beliefs and practices, and Yellowstone's environmental suffering is a testament to that. The gray wolf was reintroduced to the park in 1995. Today there are 10 packs of wolves living free in Yellowstone. The short-term impact of the National Park Service was putting the protected wonders of America under a unified leadership. But the longer-term impact was protecting the symbols of natural beauty, power, and American pride, paving the way for true conservation of nature, history, and cultures that came before us. Another recent reform in our national parks has been acknowledging Native American connections to parklands, beginning to address the history of manifest destiny and indigenous peoples' exclusion. The Department of the Interior has started a recent initiative to allow tribes to co-manage in some national parks. Deb Haaland, who was the first Native American to serve on the presidential cabinet, worked tirelessly to remove derogatory names from public lands, including Yellowstone. Ultimately, Yellowstone and the NPS's biggest impact is the 63 national parks in the U.S. and the over 6,500 parks in over 100 countries worldwide that followed its lead. Before Yellowstone, protecting land in general was an absurd idea, and before the NPS, true conservation seemed impossible. It is possible if a push had not been made to find an official way to preserve these lands, that some of the most beautiful places in the nation would have been destroyed before any of us got to see them. In conclusion, Yellowstone's history is one of both triumphs and adversity, and it's become the driving force behind the conservationist movement. The otherworldly atmosphere of Yellowstone has had an impact across generations of people from different homes, backgrounds, and beliefs, whether they wanted to explore it, protect it, or just make a quick buck off of it. To quote Pulitzer Prize-winning author Wallace Stegner, "National parks are the best idea we've ever had. Absolutely American, absolutely democratic. They reflect us at our best rather than our worst." It is an unmeasurable impact is seen in the amount of work individuals put in to create the park, the publication it received, and the change in the men who were sent to protect it. Also in the modern-day reforms that are nationwide news stories like the Gray Wolves reintroduction. Put simply, if people didn't care about Yellowstone, it would have been destroyed long before it was a park. But it's still here, proving that it is the symbol of the conservationist movement. The fact that over 100 years after the park's creation, its actions are still important issues to the entire nation is proof that Yellowstone has changed America.